Hey groupers, Pastor Marshall here. Hope you're excited to dig into the story of Hagar in Genesis 16 and Genesis 21. To get you talking, and I don't think you'll have any trouble coming up with subject matter, fodder for this subject matter, dysfunctional families. They're in the Bible, they're of course in our own lives. Do you ever feel like standing up and saying, "Hi, my name is Marshall, and I came from a dysfunctional family"? Well, icebreaker. This is my question for you. When did you realize that you came from a dysfunctional family? When was your innocence lost? I told you before that my parents were divorced when I was a child, when I was a toddler. I didn't know that I was from a dysfunctional family then. It wasn't until I was in late junior high and my dad was leaving his next wife that my innocence was lost, began to have my eyes opened as to what was going on in the dynamics of my family. I wonder about you, if you would share, if you would be open, if you would be transparent with your group members. Well, clearly, Abraham and Sarah live in a dysfunctional family, and Abraham really needed a fireman's pole like we have here in the staff offices to really get away from the situation as quickly as possible, but he didn't do that. What do you think is going on? This is what I want you to talk about. We're talking about Hagar specifically this week. In Genesis chapter 16, what do you think is going on in Hagar's mind at the beginning of the story? When Sarah says to Hagar, "You're going to sleep with my husband, you're going to have his child, but it's going to be my child, not yours." Do you think that Hagar is a victim in this situation? Do you think that she is not a victim, that she has had a role to play that has led to this part of the story? Does the text suggest anything to help with the answer to this question? Well, second, what is the significance of the angel of the Lord coming to Hagar's rescue? First of all, are you surprised that this angel does show up and helps Hagar? I mean, she's not the promised wife of Abraham. Sarah is. Isaac's the promised child, not Hagar, not Ishmael. What do you think is the significance of this angel coming? Why do you think this happens? It doesn't just happen once, it happens twice, and in 16 and in 21. Talk about that a little bit. Hagar does return to Sarah and Abraham's household after she sees the angel out in the wilderness on the way back to Egypt. She returns. Any of you, what do you think that it was like for those 14 plus years that Abraham is with his wife and with Hagar and Ishmael? Isaac will come along at some point, and then at some point he'll be weaned and Hagar and Ishmael will be sent away. But before that, in that gap of 14 or so years, what do you think it was like? And do any of you in the group, do any of you have any kind of parallels in your own life or in your own families that would shed some light on this situation? History is a constant story of conflict between Abraham's son Isaac and all of his offspring, and Abraham's son Ishmael and all of his offspring. God makes both of these offsprings into great nations, and these nations have lived in conflict ever since then. I wonder if you have any idea why you think that God created these two great nations that would live, it seems, in history of the world until Jesus comes back in conflict. Why do you think that God did that? Finally, I shared with you on Sunday that Islam claims Ishmael as their patriarch. Now, what that means is that they believe in the same God that we believe in a general sense, hardly in a literal sense. God's revelation about himself continues to unfold through the family of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. God continues to reveal his nature. He continues to unfold his story, ultimately in coming as a man in the form of Jesus Christ, and we get the revelation of God through Jesus. But that said, Ishmael, Islam, they claim this God to some degree. I want you to answer a couple of questions about that. What do you think that it means that their understanding of God is like if it's so truncated, if it's such a small view of God? The only understanding that they have of God, like we have, is in the first 20 chapters of Genesis. How dysfunctional is their understanding of God if it's so truncated? That's what I want you to talk about. Maybe you would think about your own family dysfunction. How much would you know about your dad if you had only known him for a little bit? Maybe some of you have a story like that, where your father's other children knew him a lot more than you knew him, and you only found out about him in the end. How does that relate to our relationship with God as Christians, as being part of the Jewish story and getting the full revelation of God? Well, that's going to be an interesting discussion. Every week I like to talk about what I like, and I want you to do the same thing. I like that Abraham attempts to provide for Hagar and Ishmael. Sarah is done. Get this woman out of my house and the son out of my house. And I see that Abraham is certainly between a rock and a hard place, and I like that he tries to take care of his son. What I don't like, well, there is a whole lot that I don't like in these stories, but I really don't like the position that Sarah and Hagar put Abraham in, where he has to stand between both of these boys and make a decision. I really think he wishes that he had a fireman's pole, that he could quickly escape this situation. Application, I want to remind you that on Sunday, we talked about breaking the cycles of dysfunction in our families. This last weekend, we talked about doing good. Peter says that if we do good, we can break these cycles so that hopefully will reduce the level of dysfunction in our families. I don't think we'll erase it. Everybody's normal till you get to know them, but we can reduce it. Well, I hope that you have a great study. I look forward to seeing you this next weekend as we continue our walk through Genesis.